Okay, so we are live, and today we have Michael Licari. He's an avid supporter for VA claim consulting companies, and we'll dive into all that of what that means. And if you watch this channel, you know that I'm not a big fan of this practice or these companies. But today, Michael and I are going to be having a professional, honest discussion about the culture surrounding this issue. There's really going to be no personal attacks, so everyone will just relax, breathe. It's going to be fine. Michael, go ahead and introduce yourself, your background, what brought you here. Talk about VBG if you want to, and then we'll start diving right on in.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And for those that watch, thank you for your interest in the topic. I worked for Veteran Benefits Guide for 4 years, and I left the company in February of this year. And during that 4 years, I was the chief legal officer and also the vice president of government affairs. And that role brought me to a place where I was ultimately trying to help pass the PLUS Act and also help, I guess, educate the members of Congress and the public at large, especially the veteran community, on what VBG does and what the industry of claims consultants ultimately do. And then I was also responsible, with the help of a few other folks, helping create the trade association known as NAVR, the National Association for Veterans Rights. And I was looking at some of the comments about the PLUS Act and the Guards Act on LinkedIn. Saw that Clayton had made a funny meme that was Spider-Man related, and
that was a good one.
It was a good one. It was very good, and it was in response to Veteran Guardian talking about what claim sharks are, and then I went down a Clayton rabbit hole and I watched some of his videos, and I thought he was pretty knowledgeable about the topic, fair, and so I felt like this might be an opportunity to have a reasonable and honest discussion about the topic of monetizing or expanding accreditation so that claims consulting companies can become accredited, become a part of the veteran system, and then have a regulated system around the initial claims process.
All right, awesome. First, thank you very much for that, especially the meme part. The Spider-Man one, where like, you're not a claim shark, they're a claim shark, right? And we'll get into all that. But to start it off, because you probably have, at least from people I've talked to, the most experience on the PLUS Act and the Guard Act, I think that'd be a great way to start, because it kind of segues, it makes two categories of for and against. And there's a lot of nuance and details in that. So can you start about, if you were to explain the PLUS Act to your mom, just go ahead at the lowest common denominator. What's the PLUS Act for? How does it help veterans? And then I'll challenge you. How do you think it also harms veterans as well? We'll do both sides of the coin for both.
All right. So the PLUS Act, to me, in its simplest form, and this is going to be super simple, it expands accreditation so that folks that help on initial claims are regulated by the VA, and then the amount of fees that they charge and how they go about handling each claim, that would end up falling under the CFR. And right now, the way I read the Code of Federal Regulations is that the claims consulting companies are not regulated. There are no rules in the regulations that govern the claims consulting companies.
Okay. And I'll start with how this helps veterans. Obviously, I'm on the opposite side of the road here, but how the PLUS Act would help veterans is more options, right? If that person is incentivized and being paid, obviously they would do more work than your typical, 76-year-old dude at the American Legion down the road. Generally speaking, that's probably where the PLUS Act would come into play. Could you make an argument on how the PLUS Act would harm veterans?
Well, one of the arguments that the VFW has made a lot is that it would harm the free option, because there's a belief that if you pass the PLUS Act, then every VSO representative is going to start charging fees. I'll be honest with you, the VSOs right now could leave the VFW and go work for VBG or Vet Guardian. There's over 60 companies in this industry, over 1,000 employees. So that I guess concern exists today, but that is definitely one of the concerns that the VFW has expressed. But going back to the benefits, you're right. There would be more options, but I think the key benefit here is that, well, let me say it like this. It's not, the VSOs are not the problem in the process at all. The problem is the process itself. Okay. The reason that veterans come to companies like Veteran Benefits Guide and they'll pay them money to do this work that they could get done for free is because the CMP process at the VA is broken. And I've seen this like firsthand, and I'll get into this in a little bit more detail, but basically, there's no incentives at the VA for the government contractors that do the actual CMP exams to do them correctly. And there are GAO reports and there are OIG reports that talk about all of the errors and the mistakes that the government contractors make and how those errors and mistakes go uncorrected, right? And the other part of this that I want to point out here is that the regulated portion of the claims process is the appeals process, right? And that's the part that the accredited agents and the accredited attorneys, that's the part that's monetized for them, right? So for those folks to actually make money on a claim, you've got to have an error in the initial exam for the accredited piece of this to actually become monetized. And so the way that the good claims consulting companies view this is, if we get this right on the first try, then you get your correct rating sooner, you get your money sooner, and you don't have to wait as long, and you don't have to pay as much money at the end of this. And let me get into what I mean here, because I know that this is a huge point of contention.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So the VSOs will say, and the attorneys will say, companies like Veteran Benefits Guide are charging like 200-300% of the back pay. Okay. And that's, I guess, true if you do the math, but it's apples and oranges. And I'm going to explain this. And this is really important for people to understand. The goal of these claims consulting companies is for the veteran to avoid the appeal. And VBG says all the time, our average claim is somewhere between 8 and 9 months. And then the VFW says they can't get it done any faster than anybody else. They're lying about this. We're not saying that when we send a claim to the VA, that the VA processes it faster. What's being said there is that the veteran is getting the final rating, the correct rating, faster. Okay. The average appeal is about 3.5 to 4 years, depending on what part of the year you're checking. Okay. When those appeals are going, the back pay is accumulating, right? And so, for example, if you've got your average appeal is 4 years and you're at 0% and you end up at 100%, you're going to get back pay in the amount of like $170,000 or something like that. And then you're going to pay the attorney somewhere between 20 and 33%. That fee is, we're talking about $30,000 to $50,000 in that scenario that you're paying that lawyer. The highest fee that a lot of these claim consulting companies charge, and the fee that's in the Plus Act that's publicly available, is $12,500. So they're not, the claims consulting companies, for the most part, they're not basing their fee on a percentage of the back pay, because their goal is to shrink the amount of time that the back pay is actually accumulating, because they're trying to get the final result sooner.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of pick some holes at this, right? And this is why I wanted to do this, because I couldn't disagree more, but I wanted to have this conversation, okay? So there's some assumptions being made here that the appeal the veteran would make goes to the Board of Appeals. And that's really where you'll see that really, really long time frame. But that doesn't account for higher level reviews and supplemental claims. And yes, those both suck. That's a fact, right? No one wants to be denied and then speak to a higher level review informal conference and then have a duty to assist error and then be denied again and then gather evidence, then submit a supplemental claim. And that could really draw out. 3 to 4 years, I would probably argue against. And when it comes to back pay, and there's, let's just lay all the cards on the table here. Are there accredited agents and attorneys that push for the Board of Appeals? Absolutely. Right. If I'm a businessman and I'm running an accredited attorney or agent office, that is the most money I'm going to have access to, which is objective. Well, in my opinion, it's wrong. Okay. It's subjectively wrong in my opinion, but it's legal technically. But on the appeals process, like the higher level reviews and supplemental claims, that's generally easy. And if someone were to use an accredited attorney or agent for that, we definitely wouldn't see really, really high numbers of back pay. I do agree with you, okay, that claim consulting companies, at least the good ones, because there's a lot of baloney claim consulting companies out there, and we'll definitely talk about that too. But the good ones really submit that, or they help you gather the evidence and submit the fully developed claim up front, which makes the process faster. I completely agree with that. I would actually make the argument that VSO should probably take a look at submitting fully developed claims instead of just submitting claims that the veteran wants, right? How that appointment goes at a VSO office typically is, hey, veteran, what do you want to submit? Oh, I don't know. Okay, what about your back, your mental health, migraines, and your knee pain? Boom, and that's it. That's generally how the appointment goes. I think there needs to be a discussion there about what is the evidence relating to the big three, right? The in-service event, the current diagnosis, and the nexus. And if that evidence is shady, would a private nexus strengthen that claim? I would like to see VSOs move into that area to start submitting evidence-based claims or fully developed claims personally. So I am on board with that. I'm not on board with assuming that the accredited attorney is going to make 20, 30 grand based on the back pay, which out of Board of Appeals, that's correct. It would happen. But for supplemental claims and higher level reviews, you would not see that. And the issue becomes, okay, well, when is it okay for a claims company to charge for assisting a claim, and when is it not? And at least my take on that answer, and I'm going to kick this back to you as well. My take on that answer is when it comes to initial claims, specifically claims where the veteran has all the evidence, right? So you'll see that with increases, you'll see that with BDD claims. So when a service member is leaving the service, generally speaking, that's the best time and easiest time to submit your claims. And then for presumptive conditions, specifically the PACT Act, so sinusitis, rhinitis, asthma, you get the point. Those three, personally, if the claims companies just didn't touch those three, I think that from my point of view, I don't think there would be an issue at all. Now, when it comes to fighting appeals and submitting that fully developed claim and then talking to a claims company and being referred to an independent medical opinion provider, that's where these companies will shine. Same with accredited attorneys as well, but that's where they shine. And so if I had my way, I would protect increases, initial claims, and presumptive conditions, and then allow the claims company to do whatever it is the claims company wants to do with that. That's my personal view. I understand that's like a huge compromise and it kind of in the middle there. But if I was to give and take, that's what I would do. So my question to you, Michael, is what are your thoughts on increases, initial claims where the veteran has all the evidence, like a BDD, and PACT Act or presumptive conditions? How do you see those three involved in a claims company charging for the easy claims, so to speak?
Yeah. Okay. So I agree with you to a point on the presumptive claims, and I'll circle back to that. On the initial claims, that's where I'll disagree and I'll push back. So let me tell you my story, because it's a story about an increased claim, and it'll give some context for where I'm coming from here. So I was a Marine, and I got out in 2002, and I went through the TAPS program that I think a lot of folks are familiar with, where you basically go through a pretty unserious series of medical exams to determine how disabled you are, right? And when I got out in 2002, I had some major issues with my nerves and my back that happened because of a Humvee rollover. And I went through the process, and I got diagnosed with a knee strain, and they gave me a rating of 20%. And after that, I got out of the Marines and I went to college. And while I was in college, my back got really bad. So I had to go to the VA, and they did an MRI for the very first time. And I think a lot of us would agree that, the healthcare in the military isn't the best. And so, I had this problem for over 2 years, and I didn't ever have an MRI done. So then I did the MRI, and they're like, oh no, you've got bulging disc that's pinching your nerves. You're going to need surgery. And so I was 23 years old, and I was a junior in college at the time. I had done 2 years of community college while I was in, and I had to have back surgery as a 23-year-old. So then I had the surgery, and I graduated, and I went to law school. And I was in law school, and I was like, well, if they diagnosed me with a knee strain and I ended up having back surgery, I'm probably more than 20%, but that's all I knew. So I went to the VA, and I saw a VA doctor, because back then in like 2005 or 6, whatever year that was, they were still doing the exams internally. They weren't outsourcing them to mega corporations. And so I saw the VA doctor, and I remember this like it was yesterday. I told him, look, I have a back problems, and some days I can't even touch my toes, and some days I feel great. But today I feel great. And I didn't know what the standards were, but I said to him that day, just kind of by happenstance, like, don't judge me by how I feel today, judge me on my worst days. And I told him all about it. And I don't know what he put in the report, but I ended up not getting an increase. I was denied an increase. About 2 years later, I decided to try again. I don't remember why I tried again, but I felt like I owed it to myself to keep going. And so I tried it third time. And this time I had a similar experience, told the VA doctor, judge me on my worst day. I think I got a better doctor this time, because he took down some notes, and I got an increase to 50%. Fast forward to 2020, and I joined Veteran Benefits Guide, and I decided to use their service because I work for them, and it's relevant to my life. And I ended up at 100%. And in that period of time, it was 19 years. It took me 19 years to get to that point, and that was three different increase attempts. And so I understand what you're saying when if the veteran has all of the evidence, maybe these companies shouldn't help. But the reality is that there are just so many mistakes made in reviewing the evidence. And one of the things that these companies have sort of adopted to a certain extent, and it's actually been frowned upon by the VFW, among others, is that they present the evidence in a uniform manner, to the extent that they can, as long as it remains, accurate and objective. They present it in the same way. So it's easier for these non-medical VA raters to review it and get it correct. And I will say this too, the technology in today's world is moving in a direction where AI is going to do a lot of this work, and it's going to become easier to review the evidence from a non-medical individual's perspective. But that's sort of what this the good companies have sort of done is, hey, we're going to send you, a couple thousand back disabilities per year, a couple thousand knee issues, and we're going to present the evidence in a uniform way each time and make it easier for you to review it. so look, I think that there's just it's a, VA did like what, 2 million exams last year in the fiscal year 2023. That was like almost double what they did the year before. They're not ever criticized for the accuracy of the ratings or the inaccuracy of the ratings. They're criticized when the backlog number is too high. That's when, military.com or militarytimes.com, that's when they write their articles. It's not when the claims are not accurate. I mean, there was a study that came out like a couple years ago where the VA was improperly rating military sexual trauma victims, right? So these women veterans were a specific group that were, being discriminated against. And then there was the report that came out where the African-American veterans were not getting PTSD at the same rate that other veterans were getting, right? And so that's where the increased claims, where the claims consulting companies can add value to the increased claims. I'll stop there and before I go to the presumptives, if you want to.
Yeah. So I am in complete agreement with you that the problem is not VSOs, meaning organizations and county, okay, both. I agree that the problem isn't attorneys or claims agents or the VA raters themselves, okay? I agree with all of that. That one's a little debatable, but we'll kind of kick that to the side. I think what you had said about the C&P exam being the single point of failure for the VA's process, I'm completely on board with. The OIG report from 22, I believe, kind of paints that picture for us. So it is objective, where not only did the VA not follow procedures at submitting relevant evidence to the examiner, you can't expect an examiner to give a favorable opinion without relevant evidence. Okay, so that's one. But let's just assume that they did. There isn't, you're right, there's not a mechanism to check or spot check the exam companies. You kind of just take them at their word. And that is the number one variable in every single veteran's claim, whether it's initial, presumptive meaning like Terra that requires an opinion, or an increase or an appeal. That is the number one single point of failure, or the C&P examiner. So in my opinion, if the VA could fix that problem, I think it would alleviate a ton of other problems. Okay, personally. Now on presumptive conditions, and this one I am very, very hard. I'm very firm in this stance that if a company charges on a presumptive condition, specifically the PACT Act, like sinusitis, rhinitis, and that veteran obviously meets the time criteria. So they were an Afghan in 2010. Now they have a current diagnosis of sinusitis. They're going to be rated 30%. I'm going to argue it is objectively wrong to charge that veteran for that increase on the PACT Act claim specifically. There's also, we see an increase in these companies around 2022, but pretty much the last 2 years. And so you have all these mom and pop claims consulting companies pop up out of nowhere. You can just go to YouTube and there's probably over 100 that I could search in the next 10 minutes that have like 1,000 subscribers or so or less that are doing these individual claims companies. They made a LLC and now they are creating companies based on how easy it is to, one, target a veteran coming out of the BDD process, okay, and then two, target a veteran who's going to submit PACT Act claims. And that's relevant now because I'm an OEF OIR type of veteran, okay? In the last 20 plus years, you're going to see OIF, OIR, OEF veterans that do rate PACT Act. And I just cannot get on board with charging for PACT Act claims, any presumptives really, but specifically PACT Act. And so my question to you is, I'm not sure where you fall on that. And if you do want to defend that answer, I would absolutely love to hear your take on it. But I think it is, not to use strong language here, but I think it is really bad. I'll just say that. I think it's really bad if a company is charging for a PACT Act claim specifically. And that's where I feel like the VFW has their best argument. I'm saying VFW because they're like the, this tip of the spear when it comes to Don't Feed the Sharks campaign and all that stuff. They're really the most outspoken about it. The American Legion was kind of on board until they made a statement last year that kind of made it wishy-washy. So that's neither here or there. But I really want to hear your take on charging for a presumptive condition, and where you fall on that personally, and what do you think about these companies that do charge?
Yeah, so I have a lot to say on this because it kind of spider webs from there.
Yeah.
Let me start by saying that you're right that a lot of companies post PACT Act sprouted up, right? And I think that that's why you've seen, and I'm not speaking for Vet Guardian here, but Vet Guardian has been around since 2017, which is like 5 years before the PACT Act. Veteran Benefits Guide started in 2015. And that's why you see those companies, well, at least Vet Guardian, call out some of these other companies because they're trying to differentiate between the pre-PACT Act companies and the post-PACT Act companies. I can tell you that at VBG, they didn't do the PACT Act claims for the very reason that you pointed out, because there's no value to add to somebody that's presumptive 100%, and the types of disabilities that you're describing. If you were in the right place and you have that particular disability, you're going to get 100%. So there's really no value add there. So VBG specifically, and obviously not every company did this, but VBG made a decision that they weren't going to help vets that do that. And then I can tell you for a fact that when VBG got those kind of veterans that would call and didn't know that, they would send them to the VSOs in the areas where those veterans were from. And then you should also know that, okay, so everybody knows about the PLUS Act, and what your audience doesn't know is that there are other iterations of the PLUS Act that never went public, and that was being negotiated in 2023 between the claims consulting companies, the House, the Senate, VA committees, and the VFW and the Legion and the DAV were involved in these discussions. And there's other drafts of the PLUS Act, and one of the more recent drafts that I saw before I left VBG, it did ban presumptive conditions, and so that was going to be in the final version of PLUS, and that was something that I can tell you VBG and Vet Guardian had no issue with. But that's just not something that anybody understands. And look, I agree with you. If you're a company that started up post PACT Act and all you're doing is PACT Act claims, yeah, you're absolutely ripping vets off. And not every vet knows that that's a simple claim, right? Mm-hmm. And if you want to find a culprit to slap a claim shark title to or a predatory label to, yeah, that I'll agree with that. I'd like to think, at least initially, that most veterans are in a position to make their own choices, and they're able to contract with whoever they want and not have any, we don't have to, coddle the veterans. They can make most of their own decisions. But I think in this particular example, yeah, I have no issue with limiting the universe of which claims these companies are allowed to charge for. And so, some of the more established ones, they made a conscious effort not to, for the exact reason that you pointed out. Just kind of moving a little bit away from that, though, there's another type of presumptive condition. It's a little bit different than the PACT Act, though. And I'm going to give you an example here. So if you are somebody that got your jump wings in the Army and you did 50 or 60 jumps, and then you get out of the military and you have knee or back pain, that's presumptive that it's service connected, right? And I was actually sitting in Senator Jackie Rosen's office talking to one of her staffers who was a veteran. And he had told us the story about how he had jumped out of, 100 airplanes and never went to sick call because, there's a culture around not doing that. And so there was never anything in his medical records. And so he's never going to be able to get disability for his knees and back. And one of the guys I was with in this meeting from VBG pointed out to him, no, like it's presumptive that it's service connected because you have the jumps. And he didn't know that. And he had gone to a VSO and they didn't tell him that. And so, in that particular circumstance, there's a lot of value that's added to that particular veteran's claim. And we did help him with the claim. He signed up and we took care of it for him. And so that's an example where, there's just a big hole in the free services, and look, I am sure that there's a certain percentage of VSO reps that are going to know that, and they're going to catch that, and they're going to put it on the claim documents, but there are a whole bunch of them that are going to miss it too.
Yeah. So that's the, I always describe these companies as a symptom, not the problem, because the problem, at least in my opinion, is the VA's process, specifically the CMP examiners, and then the bad VSOs, right? It's kind of like the bad cops. Not all cops are bad. They're just bad cops. Same thing with VSOs. There are some stellar, amazing VSOs out there that do amazing work. And all it takes is one encounter with the bad VSO to be like, well, I got denied. Now I'm going to sit on this for 15, 20 years and not think about it until I go to YouTube, right? Then you start that process. That's where most, at least comments that I see on my channel, most veterans fall in that category where they were denied, waited forever because they were just like, but okay, I got denied. But one thing I do want to point out is I think the CMP examiners are the process. I think the bad VSOs give the VSO name a bad rep, obviously. And that part absolutely sucks. And I would make a third argument that the DoD's TAP, the Transition Assistance Program, the Marine Corps would call it the Transition Readiness Seminar, TRS. So TAP and TRS have got to be better. Yes, finding a job is great. It's like when I went through TRS in the Marine Corps, we did the job interview stuff. We did all that resume building. And then we had a VSO come in. And this particular VSO would be a bad one, according to my scale, right? And that's what we had to deal with. And I didn't know anything at that point. So I'm on board with that. I do think these companies are a symptom. The companies post-PACT Act, I could, backhand without losing sleep at all. It is interesting that you bring up, and I'm just going to be real, that you bring up the Veterans Guardian VBE not touching PACT Act claims. And my counter to this is it's really bigger than what I'm about to say. But when a VSO submits a claim, you get that decision letter back. It'll say, Veterans of Foreign Wars is your accredited rep, right? Because you have to do a power of attorney, 2122, you fill all that out. And so in what mechanisms are these companies using to track their successful claims? But more importantly, what mechanisms are in place to track the ones that aren't successful? Because there's no way to measure that at all outside of, we conducted a study internally and found no wrongdoing, right? It kind of has that same vibe to it because these companies aren't accredited, so they can't tag their name to these claims. And so there is no objective way to say, hey, this claim went well, this claim didn't go so well. And it kind of goes back to the loudest voice in the room is heard. And so those that were approved by these companies are going to be your diehard, support the Plus Act type veterans, which is completely okay, by the way. But those that are denied, those voices kind of are suppressed. But there's no way to measure. There's no mechanism to measure that because these companies aren't filling out a 2122, obviously. And so how do these companies, specifically VBG, or if you don't want to use them specifically, just what is a way these companies measure how the success of their claims that they don't help the veteran submit?
Yeah, and that's a fantastic question, and it's probably one of the areas where the claim consulting companies sort of have like a inefficiency in the model, right? And it was always a challenge at VBG. The way that they do that is they ask for the RDLs from the veterans, and they don't always provide them. And then when they don't provide them, companies like VBG don't know if they helped them or not. And that's always been a problem. I will say though that, more than 90% of the time the RDL was provided. I can't speak to any of the other companies. I don't know how they track that. What I will say though, is that that's one of the huge benefits to becoming accredited, right? If the Plus Act were to pass, that's why from, at least from my point of view, as an executive in one of these companies for a long time, I thought, yeah, who really wants to be regulated? That's not what you're really shooting for. But if that's where this is going to go, then okay, well then we'll be part of the system and we'll have access to VBMS. And I don't want to get too legalese here, but one of the big differences between the claims consulting companies and the VSOs and the attorneys is, and this because I watched your videos, but they're not representatives, right? So they're not standing in the shoes of the veteran through this claim. They're telling the veteran how to file their own claim. That's the big difference. Now, under the Plus Act, and I don't think any members of Congress really understood this, because they weren't thinking this nuance, but are you trying to make us representatives, which was fine, which would be fine, right? But that's not what we are today. But if that's what it takes to, make this fight go away, because, again, this has been going on for years, and it's just, veterans are the ones that are suffering because nothing can get done. What do you want other side of this issue to make this work? That wasn't a problem. We wanted to know, we wanted to be able to know if our evidence was getting successful decisions or not. And, not having access to the VA system was problematic for sure.
Okay, so there are some. I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's some things that happen that are fact that it at least deserves a discussion. And I'm specifically going to talk about Veterans Guardian right now. The operations officer, and I might be getting this wrong, but whenever they testified in front of the VA, the subcommittee for Veteran Affairs, failed to note and actually denied that they received cease and desist letters from the VA. And then, a number of days went by, and then that person had submitted a submittal statement saying, hey, we got the cease and desist letters. And that to me is just shady, personally. And then it really goes on to, okay, well, how are you, and this is a genuine question, I'm not trying to attack, how are these companies coming up with that dollar amount to charge that veteran? Because I'll be honest with you, I also do one-on-ones for free on the channel, and there's a whole sharing thing. People can do that, and it probably takes a solid 30 to 40 minutes, maybe an hour tops, to understand the veteran's evidence based on their testimony to me, because obviously I don't have VBMS access either. So based on what they say, I would say 1 hour tops to formulate their plan and then kick them off and say, okay, now you know what to do. So let's just say it's 3 hours of work. Okay. All in all, it's 3 hours of work. How does a company justify 5 times the increase, which to 90% to 100% is going to be about 7-ish grand. Okay. And so how do these companies justify that dollar amount that, yes, the veteran doesn't have it, so it's not coming out of the veteran's pocket, so to speak, because it's money that they don't have, but they would have had it. Also, that money is non-taxable income, meaning taxpayer dollars. And so I'm really interested to at least hear an argument for what is the justification of charging the set amount of 5 times the increase or 6 times the increase, versus just a flat fee of, hey, $1,500 and we'll help you formulate a plan. I mean, like, what's that decision and what's the justification for charging that amount of money based on 3 hours of work? And I understand there's an experience to that as well. So I'm just really interested to hear your argument for that, or if you're on, the other side of the fence, however you personally see that discussion.
Yeah. Okay. So you asked me 2 questions there. The first one about Vet Guardian cease and desist. All right. So this is what I know about that. And I've never seen the actual letter, but my understanding is that there's a company out of Florida called Trajector that used to be called Vet Comp and Pen. And when they were Vet Comp and Pen, they got a letter specifically from the VA, specifically saying cease and desist your business operations. What Vet Guardian received was different. It was a generalized letter saying that if you're doing anything unlawful, you need to stop it. It did not contain the word cease and desist. And I understand that this is nuanced and some of your viewership might not care about the difference, but in the legal world, a cease and desist letter says cease and desist. It has to have those words because that's what it is. It is not it without saying that. And Vet Guardian took the position that we didn't, the letter that one, we're not doing, or they're not doing anything illegal. And two, they're not being asked to cease and desist. And that's where that answer came from. And then when they did that, or when they said that, there was this political reaction to it. And,
course,
VFW has never explained that from a nuanced perspective, but I've watched them say that over and over again, at least a couple dozen times. Right. And so we're really just talking about, nuanced legal terms here. So that was what happened with that. Any questions about that?
No. So okay. I just actually got all the cease and desist letters, or what I'm going to call cease and desist letters. I haven't looked through them yet. There's like 50 of them. So I'm really looking forward to that. I got them over the weekend, over Easter, so I haven't had time to read any of those. But no, I have no questions on that. But if we can transition to the justifying the amounts, because that is, for me personally, that is my number one issue, is the charge is way too much. If it was 20% of the increase, you can kind of combine the attorney's guidelines and the initial claims, I could probably get on board with that. Probably. I wouldn't want to, but I could. And so it's really the charge that bothers me the most, more than anything. And I just kind of want to hear your thoughts on what's the justification for, 5 times the increase or 6 times the increase or whatever amount, company X wants to charge for these claims.
Yeah. So I want to be real careful here that I'm not speaking for anybody. And this is more of my opinion on the fees. Obviously Vet Guardian is known for being the one that sort of normalized the 5 times the monthly increase. And I don't have any insight into why that's the model that they chose. But what I can say is that, okay, so VBG, for example, they have over 200 employees and they have 2 offices, and Vet Guardian has well over 100 employees. So there's a lot of infrastructure, for example, that goes into these companies. And you've said this, they're not small companies, they're big companies. And, these companies can't afford to have like a data breach, for example. So if this is real, like this is a real threat. If China wanted to get access to tens of thousands of veterans and some active duty people's personal data, they could go to these companies and they could hack them. And if that happened one time, it's over for these companies. So they have to have HIPAA compliant servers. They have to be high-tech certified because they're housing all of this really sensitive data. And that costs a lot of money. And so, you have to balance your overhead with what your customer's willing to pay. And to figure out what your customer's willing to pay, you've got to figure out what value are you providing to them. And, whether you think this is valuable or not, when you look at, for example, the average VBG client sees an increase of about $13,000 in the first year. If their fee is $5,000, and I'm making that up, right? But if it's $5,000, but they make $13,000 in 1 year, and then they make $13,000 times 25 years, is that worth it? Especially if they've already gone through the process a couple times and felt like that it didn't go their way. It kind of comes down to market forces, right? Are the clients or the customers, are they willing to pay what you're charging? And then I think it's also worth mentioning that the fee schedule is known up front, right? And this goes back to something I said earlier, and to me, not all veterans are the same, and not all veterans need their hand held through every transaction. And if you know what you're potentially going to pay if a certain outcome occurs, you are in a position to know whether you want to sign that contract. Look, not everybody is going to be happy with the outcome, and certainly at VBG there were veterans that didn't want to pay, and VBG never sued any of them or took them to court or anything like that. And I'm sure that a lot of the other companies have a similar experience. But at the end of the day, you've got to pay your bills, and you've got to figure out, what amount of money are your customers willing to pay. And VBG specifically, and VetGuardian too, and some of the others, they have very good reputations online, right? Obviously you go to Reddit, you can find all of the negative stuff too, but you look at the reviews, and there's enough information and data out there, and certainly you can go in there and you can find people that are unhappy with the service. But by and large, percentage wise, they didn't feel like they were fooled. They felt like they knew what they were doing, or what they were going to pay for, and how much it would cost, and they were satisfied with the result. So I think that answers your question the best that I can. I certainly wasn't responsible for deciding how much
of course
VBG was going to charge.
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned that one. I think that's a fantastic argument. I really wasn't expecting that answer, so I'll give you that one. But so on my real job, I work in cyber. I also teach a cyber course, and all my degrees are in cyber policy. So I totally understand where you're coming from, and it's way more than the blanket statement that you had said, and I'm on board with that. But that leads me on the side of, I don't think that risk is worth it personally. But that's a whole other discussion as to, okay, well, what is the security around these companies and their access to veteran information? And then it goes into, you had made a statement of, okay, well, why aren't these companies suing, or, moving the bill, the invoice to collections, wherever that looks like? That's really not my cup of tea, to be honest with you. But why aren't they pursuing action against veterans that don't pay? And, I'm just going to kind of, the elephant in the room is because it's against Title 38, right? It's federally illegal. Is that a correct statement?
No, it's definitely not.
Okay.
I'm glad that you said that. I was hoping we would talk about that.
Absolutely. Send it.
No. Okay. So VBG, let me talk about why VBG doesn't sue their customers. So VBG was founded by a Marine Corps vet, and it was one of the first companies, and the percentage of customers that pay is so high that the number that don't is a nominal number. And because of, and this is my own opinion, okay, this is not a policy. Yes. But the way I see it is, if you've got 5% of your customers don't pay, you get a lot of goodwill by not forcing them to pay. And from my perspective, as somebody who has to go to Congress and say, hey, we're not what the VFW says, and in this case, like predatory, right? How can you say we're predatory when, if they're not paying, we're not suing them, right? Like you basically, you can pay if you want to, right? And I shouldn't say that, but that's kind of how the result of that policy is, fine. If you don't want to pay, then don't pay. So that's kind of where that comes from, I guess. In terms of your question about Title 38. All right. So we talked earlier about the difference between an accredited agent and attorney and the claims consultants. All right. I used to know these statutes like the back of my hand. So the USC code, I think it's 5901, 385901, and then the same CFR that you just cited. They both say that you can't be an agent or an attorney and charge a fee. Okay. And to be an agent or an attorney, you are providing a specific service. In this case, you are representing the veteran. And these are legal terms of art. Agency means something. And so at no point in time are VBG at least, I can't speak for everybody. I am sure some of these companies are doing way more than they're supposed to do. I don't know which ones, I don't know what they're doing, but I'm sure that they don't all have chief legal officers that are studying these rules and making sure that they don't run afoul of them. But as long as you're just telling them, this is how you file your claim, these are the disabilities that we think you're underrated on. Here is a doctor in your area that is specifically trained to do DBQs or Nexus letters. There is no agency in that relationship. It's a consulting relationship. It is a speech issue. Can we tell you how to file your claim in the best way possible or not? Now, look, again, there are 60 plus companies. Sounds like there might even be more by now. They all do it a little differently. Again, like some of them, they don't even do that, right? They just sell like YouTube videos that have passwords on them, and they say, this is how you do it, and we're going to charge you $1,000 for access to the video, right? Like, honestly,
don't even get me started on that one.
that's a terrible service. Like, I agree with you, but that, to me, that doesn't violate the rules. Now, if you want to limit that, like, okay, then change the rules, but that's not what those regulations say. And I want to point one more thing out, and I came prepared with this. So the American Legion on December 12th of 2023, they came out with this resolution, and you had mentioned this earlier that some things that happened at the Legion where they kind of looked like maybe they were a little bit in the middle on things. And then all of a sudden their commander came out and was like, no, we're like fully on board with guards. These companies are scum, all that, right?
Wishy-washy, yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, here's some inside baseball for you. I was personally talking to high C-level American Legion people at the end of 2023, and they were 100% on board. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's overstating it. There were some members at the C level that were like, yeah, like this fight's going on too long. The VA is broken. They understood the issue, and they were starting to come around to the idea of a regulated initial claims process. And that's when the LinkedIn people like heard about it, like it leaked out. And then you see people like Elizabeth Hartman, who has like 300,000 followers, is just like going apocalyptic about even the idea of a VSO maybe supporting some middle ground compromise. And what she didn't know is that the VFW was actually there at one point too. They just, for whatever reason, decided that they didn't want to see it to the end, right? And so in December, the Legion just stops taking my calls, and they come out with this resolution. And the first line in the resolution, I'm going to read it to you. Okay. It says, whereas the American Legion supports existing Title 38 CFR section 14.629B1 that prohibits any party from, quote, assisting a veteran in the prep, presentation, or prosecution of a Department of Veterans Affairs claim unless they are accredited through the VA for such purposes. Now, if you go to that subsection in the rules, they cut it off. They don't tell you the whole thing because it says no individual may assist claimants in the prep, presentation, or prosecution of claims for VA benefits as an agent or attorney unless he or she has first been accredited by the VA for such purposes. And so I point that out to say that they're not saying what the law says. And I had a good career before I took this job. I was a litigator, and they came to me because I was a vet and I had experience in corporate law. And they said, hey, we want to bring you in-house. We need a lawyer to help grow this business. And so I looked into this before I took the job because it was risky for me to leave what I had already built. And I felt comfortable that what VBG was doing wasn't running afoul of those rules. Now, one of the big talking points out there, and this is probably the biggest talking point, honestly, is if there were just criminal penalties still in the rules, then the VA could stop this from happening. And because there are no criminal penalties, nobody can do anything about it. That's false. That's absolutely false. If there are companies out there making millions of dollars illegally by charging vets illegally for this service, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, could absolutely stop it. And they could stop it at the state level too, but they haven't, because that's not what the law says. And one more point, and then I'll stop. New Jersey, as you know, passes their state law last year. Okay. The New Jersey law is different than the federal rules. It specifically says no one can aid or assist a veteran and charge a fee. That is a different standard than what the federal rules say. And that's why VBG pulled out of New Jersey, because the law in New Jersey says you cannot aid or assist. That is a broader prohibition than what the federal rules say.
Yeah, so it's definitely nuanced, and it's way over my head as far as, what do words actually mean from a legal perspective. I'm just some dude in my basement from Kentucky, okay? But you are correct that the Title 38 does mention agent and attorney, but policy is weird, right? So in cyber policy, it's there's always a like a national defense strategy, and then from there policy is built, right? And we see that with the VA as well. You have Title 38 CFR, and then VA policy can refine that and say, okay, well, here's what the interpretation actually means. I think the best case for that, I'm going to use obesity as an example. And so, can obesity be service connected? That answer is no, right? Now, do other agencies outside the VA, have they declared obesity as a diagnosed condition? That answer is yes. But then VA policy came out and was like, hey, it can't be direct, it can't be secondary, it can't be service connected, but it can be an intermediate step. And so policy kind of drove that and made it more refined. I'm not aware of any VA policy that has refined the Section 14 code that you stated. But that's my first question: does that exist? And if so, I think that becomes, we need to account for that. I just don't know if there is or not. I'll definitely be looking that up right after this. And then second, what New Jersey did was essentially refine the law, made it a state law. And then what I do want to hit on, and this gets into the lawsuits, and I really want to go into Texas here. But before we do that, I want to talk about Veterans Guardian appealing New Jersey Attorney General. And it was on the basis of freedom of speech. That was their entire argument. And then the Federal Court of Appeals basically were like, get a better argument. That's a synopsis version, pretty much. People can go look that up. I have a video on it, but it shows the decision as to say, hey, Veterans Guardian, you're not going to win this one, so stop. That's pretty much the decision that was rendered. And in Jersey, which is crazy to think New Jersey was the first state to do this. But I'm obviously not a fan of Jersey at all. But they set that precedent, right? Virginia started to do the same, and it got steam at the very, very beginning, and it just fell off a cliff until November of this year, I believe. Don't quote me on that. We'll have to revisit that at the end of the year. Then we have a bill in California, which is kind of a compromise. It pretty much states what you had said about accrediting these companies, but it refines them with the same constraints as attorneys and agents. So like appeals and, 33.3% ish. And so that's kind of the state, that's the, culture of state legislation being involved. And we're kind of just waiting As to what happens. Yeah, go ahead, please.
So there are way more states that have.
There's more. Yeah, there's
Kentucky has one.
Awesome.
Kentucky actually came out with theirs, I think, like January 4th or something like that. But I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think any of them are going to pass. The reality, I mean, look, I'm just going to be honest with you. The VFW has far more resources than any of these companies do, and they're everywhere. And what happens is they beat everybody to the legislators, and their goal is to try to get it passed before anybody notices. And that's what happened in New Jersey. And I'm gonna be honest, like, it caught me completely by surprise. I was flat-footed. I was like, holy smokes, like, that just, I can't believe that just happened. And I'm immediately after that, I moved to the States and I started looking at every single state. And when we were able to get to the states to tell them our side of the story, which is basically what you and I are talking about now, they don't want to pass the Guards Act in their states. There's too much nuance to all of this to just go, oh yeah, we should just reduce the number of options that are out there. You had said something earlier that I wanted to sort of add on to. You'd said there are some bad VSOs out there, and there are, but that's problematic for the veteran population. But another problem is that the number of VSO reps that are out there has dropped dramatically over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And that's happening at a time when there are more claims now than there have been in that same time frame, right? And so from my point of view, and I'm not, and when I say my point of view, I'm saying from a reasonable person here, a rational person, to reduce the number of choices at a time when the demand is higher than ever before, that's not doing right by the vet, right? And so that was a big issue that I always had, was like, guys, like, we can all see the numbers. There's a graph on the VA website that shows the claims inventory skyrocketing, and then one for the backlog. We all see it, and we all know that the VFW numbers are way down, and the Legion is the same way. And it's just like, okay, like, we can't keep fighting this forever, because the vets are being taken advantage of by some of the bad companies out there, and nobody is standing in place and saying, hey, that's a bad company. Because, as you know, every company is getting painted with the same brush by the VFW. And so, that's why we created NAVR. It was absolutely ridiculed by the VFW and others. And we're trying to, like, find a solution that protects veterans from the bad companies, because nobody is talking about it in that context. It's like, don't go to those companies because they're bad and they'll take advantage of you. Instead of, hey, here's what a good one looks like on this side, and here's what a bad one looks like on that side. And so that's why, I went to, some of the people in the industry and said, we should create a trade association that at least can stand up and say, okay, this is kind of what a good one looks like and a bad one looks like, at least until legislation passes, because it looked to me like there wasn't a legislative solution once they walked away from the bargaining table. And I'm like, really, this is going to go on through the 2024 election? So it's just status quo, and all the, because there's stories about vets paying like 50 or 60 grand for this service. And that's not acceptable. And look, I read the complaint against VA Claims Insider, and if some of that stuff is true, that needs to be addressed. So from my point of view, as somebody that cares, I felt like starting the trade association was a wise move. I didn't expect the backlash. And, it was a couple of days after we announced the launch that Senator John Tester and Representative Mark Takano, the two, the chairman in the Senate and the ranking member in the House, are standing with the VFW while they're calling us criminals. And like, I'm a vet, and I'm not like a bad guy. Like we've talked a little bit. I got 3 kids. I coach baseball. And I'm like, what is going on here? I'm just trying to solve a problem. And, to get painted with that kind of vitriol, it was honestly, it was hard for me. And it's worth mentioning, like, I've met with those people that are making, I've sat at the same table as these people, and I've explained some of these things that I'm talking to you about. They know that this stuff, I've told them. And, and look, what I'm really describing is politics, right? Like I live in Las Vegas. Okay. I'm not anywhere near DC. So when I go to DC and this all happens, people are like, oh, that's just politics. And I'm like, oh, just politics. Okay. Well, it doesn't make me sleep better at night.
Yeah. So, there's going to be people in the sand on both sides, and that's going to happen, right? It's politics, so to speak. But you did mention something, because I will give it to both sides that yes, the VFW definitely lobbies on the state side for these basically state versions of the Guard Act that's more refined, pretty much. But in the same breath, we see Veterans Guardian lobbying on the Congress side and donating tons of money, sponsoring Congress or golf tournaments and events and all this other stuff. And it's the same breath, but obviously in support of the Plus Act. So that's a two-way street there, and that's gonna happen. We call it lobbying. Some would call that corruption. That's neither here or there. Okay, whatever. But I do, before we end the stream, I do want to talk about Texas specifically, and there's two things I want to bring up. It's the lawsuit from the State Consumer Protection Act. I'm sure it has a real name, but everyone understands the point, from Texas Attorney General, and then the class action lawsuit, both against VA Claims Insider. Personally, I think the class action is a bit stronger than Texas Attorney General's argument, because the class action basically states there's an unfair advantage in the market. And I think that is for me, reading it as a dude in their basement, it seems objective to me, right? That you have attorneys and agents that are following the rules as per Section 38, right? That we described. And then you have this company that is operating outside of those rules. And that's the argument that they are creating, given the unfair advantage. All right. I think that's a very strong argument, and that one has my attention more than any others. But then you have the Texas Attorney General that has the motion to file, and this is the point that I really want to bring up, because it shows, Texas Attorney General builds their argument, and it shows the sensitive information of the veteran in the hands of VA Claims Insider. And it goes back to what we had said about, all right, protecting that data from very serious, real threats, okay, in the cyberspace domain. What does that look like? Is that legal? That is, me personally, just because I'm in the cyber world, that's too much of a risk for me. But not every veteran's going to know that or even care about that. And so I am curious as how VA Claims Insider's legal team is going to defend on both fronts, the class action, which I think is going to be extremely difficult, and then the Texas Attorney General, where they do have access to veteran PII and are logging into va.gov to literally submit the claim in the most literal sense, which is, again, a bit shady, right? I'm not saying, VBG is doing this or Veterans Guardians doing this, because we don't know, but we know VA Claims Insider is doing this per Texas Attorney General's argument. I think it's going to be very difficult to defend. And then, how do you regulate these companies? Because you don't know this until discovery is being made. And then you have veterans come forward, because the company's not going to give it to you, right? And so from your perspective, whether that's personal or legal or whatever, route you want to take, we'll kind of end it here as to what are your thoughts on VA Claims Insider Texas side and the class action side.
Okay. Both very good questions. Let me preface my answer by saying that I don't know if any of the allegations against Claims Insider are true or not. But I have read the papers, and so I'll just comment on what the allegations are, and assuming they're true, sort of. And then I want to also preface this by saying there's a difference between what might be illegal and what might be not so great business practice, right? So I'll start with the unfair competition class action brought by the attorneys and agents. I'm going to be honest, I don't think that they're going to win. I think Claims Insider is going to win that case. And I want to say that somebody sued Trajector in Florida for the same thing.
They're going everywhere.
Yeah. No, that's a losing battle for sure, in my opinion. I think that what's gonna come out, the facts are gonna show that. And again, I don't know everybody's model, but if it were VBG, the VBG's model is so different than what these other companies do. It's not unfair. The way that VBG charges for the services that they provide is completely different than what the services that are being provided by the accredited agents and attorneys. And these companies that they're suing, they don't do appeals. So in my mind, those are not gonna be successful. In terms of the Texas consumer protection case, to the extent that I know what's going on there, I think that's a kind of a tough case for the attorney general too. Now, look, if you're saying, hey, this is a free service and then you've got to pay later, that's bait and switch, that's fraud. Yeah. That you can win there, right? For sure. But a lot of the other stuff, like, it's not something that I would endorse, right? Like, I don't think you should be asking vets for their login credentials and then using them. And I can understand why you might get an older vet that doesn't have computer literacy, and it's easier to go get the docs for them or whatever. But if they're voluntarily giving this information to you, again, putting it's not, the question isn't, is it a good business practice? Is it legal or illegal? I don't know that it's illegal. So I'm curious to see, what the Texas AG, how this case goes. But one thing that I really noticed in that case is what's not in there. They're not suing them saying, hey, you can't charge these fees, right? That is not in that case. And if the Texas Attorney General felt like the CFR or Title 38 was violated here, that's there for them to bring it, and they chose not to. They chose to focus specifically on the behavior or the statements that were made by VA Claims Insider. And so, when that happened, and I was still working for VBG, I wasn't worried about it because all of the allegations in there in the complaint, we weren't doing any of those things. So, and then, like I said, they were talking about, whether the fees were legal or illegal. So as far as we were concerned, that was a problem that was unique to VA Claims Insider. So if I had to bet, I would say that the AG case is the stronger of the two, by a lot, but I still think that it's a tough case for the AG. But look, and this is politics, but they say, oh, we're protecting vets. These vets are getting taken advantage of. And so it's a politically good case for an elected official to bring. And look, I'm sure that, I read the reviews of Claims Insider, and they don't do a great job all the time either. And, there's probably some truth to some of the allegations. And if it turns out that some of those things are true, they could very well be in trouble. You had asked in one of your videos to clarify what the damages would look like. And if you're if you're a victim of Claims Insider for one of the consumer protection rules, then you would get your fees back, right? So if you paid them $5,000, then your damages would be $5,000. And I assume that the state of Texas puts interest on that money too. So it'd be probably at the 10% rate that every other state has. So that's what the damages would be there.
That would crush them. I mean, I don't know what their
business put them out of business.
Looks
like.
Yeah.
It'd be every dollar that they've ever made practically. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I do want to end it here, and I'll give you, the chance to give any closing statements as well. Basically, how I see this is I am on the side of Guard Act, right? If I had my way, it would be Guard Act 100% personally. But that doesn't mean we should, the other side doesn't have arguments. And that's really why we're kind of doing this, is to have just a discussion and back and forth and just inform the community as to what's going on instead of reading a headline that comes out of, wherever it is you get your information from. But I will say, I don't think any of this matters until legislation is passed. So we can talk all day about it. These companies will continue to practice. And, are there good companies? Probably. Are there bad companies? Probably. Are there good VSOs? Yes. Are there bad VSOs? Probably. Okay. So it goes, it's a tit for tat on both ends. There's good arguments on both sides. I'm personally on the Guard Act side, but we really won't know until anything is passed. And so that's kind of what we're just doing here. It's just waiting for things to be passed to set that precedence. And once it's set, then we can go ahead and speak on, well, what is objectively right or wrong? Because until that happens, it's all opinions, and opinions are completely okay. I'm not more right than Michael. Michael's not more right than I am. We're just talking about it. And so with that, Michael, I'll go ahead and give you the floor. And then once you're finished, that'll be the end of the stream.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for the enriching conversation. I really appreciate it. This is really refreshing. And then I hope that your audience learned a thing or two today. I certainly did. So thanks for the opportunity to come on and talk about it. Let me ask you a couple questions before we go here.
Yeah.
So one of your videos a couple weeks ago, you said that if the Plus Act passed, that you would consider starting a business and helping vets, right?
1,000,000,000%. And I think every accredited VSO, especially volunteer side, would be ignorant not to consider that.
All right. And then you had said that you've helped a few vets already without charging them, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay. And presumably you know what you're doing and you did a good job for the vets that you've already helped, right?
Hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you seem like you know your stuff, and certainly more than some of the folks that I've come across in the industry. Mm-hmm. What I'm getting at here is that you know what I'm getting at, huh?
Yeah. So go ahead.
If you pass the Plus Act, people like you that know what they're doing are going to get into the industry, and veterans are going to have more good options to getting their benefits. And I think that's at the end of the day, and you had said in your video that veterans having choices is a strong argument in favor of the Plus Act, right? And if veterans have more good choices and they're already going through the TAP program, which is a government program, and then they have these choices afterwards, that just seems like that's what's best for the vets to me. Now, look, I get it. Like, some people are not going to agree even after that, but I think one of the things that, as this conversation, not our conversation, because the conversation will continue long past this video.
This don't matter. Yeah.
Yeah. But we just got to remember that we got to make sure that the vets are getting the correct rating. That's got to be the priority. And look, if the VA tomorrow says, hey, we just adopted this technology that gets it right 99.9% of the time, these companies go away. They absolutely go away. Nobody's going to pay for the service anymore. But as of today, the VA is still making a couple 100,000 mistakes on claims per year. And so until we can get to that point where those mistakes are really limited, I think that the market is there for this service for a while still.
I totally agree. And back to your point, because I can't not respond. You're right. I would absolutely. The Plus Act is passed. I will quit my federal job and do this full time. 1,000%. That's what I'll do. The issue with that is it has to be regulated. And you had mentioned, the Plus Act that's not public. I'm very curious as to what that actually is. But if it's not regulated, you will have predatory practices still involved. If someone is charging for a PACT Act claim, that's prison time. To me, that's prison time. That is, it doesn't get more predatory than that. So I guess it depends on what does that regulated Plus Act actually look like. But other than that, if you don't have anything else to say, that's pretty much the end.
Well, again, thanks so much. This was a good time. Appreciate it. Maybe something crazy will happen between now and whenever, and we can do it again.
Oh yeah, for sure. All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Clayton.